All right, we're back for advanced business communications and storytelling for data storytellers. And this is kind of a special episode because this is about Oren Klaff, and in fact, this is round 2. So we did record last week a huge 2-hour-long conversation, and 100% my fault that it was way too deep. I 100% geeked out on these concepts that I'm quite passionate about, but we found with Dave that the scope of that was not appropriate for data analytics leaders. So it's still an interesting conversation, but we decided to kind of go over the key concepts again and just zoom in on the most important techniques of application and just really do an 80-20 review on this.
We're going to make the director's cut available, of course, but this will be the Cliff's Notes or the Reader's Digest version, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But even if you watch that longer version, I think you will still find this valuable. So, Oren Klaff's book, Pitch Anything. Oren Klaff, again, he is a venture capitalist. He pitches big, multi-million-dollar deals for investors. And he wrote this book called Pitch Anything, which is about how to present ideas in a way that will be engaging for the audience, and how can you make sure that your messages are received. So there are some key concepts in the book. So one of the key concepts is neuroeconomics. So neuroeconomics is just basically an idea that the brain has a certain structure that has to do with how the brain evolved. And because of that, there's a fundamental disconnect between how you present ideas and how your ideas are received. And there's a filtering mechanism for the brain. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. There's the idea of frame control. So frames, in essence, are what he calls mental structures that shape the way we see the world. We're going to expand on that a little bit. And it has to do with how to make sure that your social interactions have the right dynamic in order to drive collaboration. And then the third concept in the book, that was a key concept, is the idea of status. So that has to do with your position in relation to the audience and how that affects how your message is being received. So those are the 3 key ideas that we're going to spend a little bit of time on. So if we look at neuroeconomics, so neuroeconomics, again, it has to do with the brain's structure and evolution. In a very high-level overview, and it's a very inaccurate view on a neurological level, but still applies on a practical level, is that the brain has 3 main parts. The oldest part is the center of the brain, the core of the brain, which we call the crog brain. So this is from our earliest phases of evolution. This is also why it's called the lizard brain or the crog brain, and it has to do with very basic functioning. It has to do with hunger. It has to do with survival. And there's the midbrain, which is a little bit later in the evolutionary journey, often called the Labrador brain. Now, this is still not like a problem-solving entity, but it has to do with social relationships and desire in general. And then we have our high-functioning brain, which we usually, human beings, we think about our brain as this high-functioning object in general. But in fact, what we think about as our cognition is usually driven from the new brain, the neocortex, which is our prefrontal cortex, and that's actually a very thin part of the brain. And the idea here is that when someone hears your ideas, you are actually articulating those ideas from your prefrontal cortex, your new brain. Because an idea, in order for you to put it together and to present it, it has to actually be presented from your new brain. But when someone hears your idea, because these people who are listening, especially in a corporate context, especially when we're talking about scarce resources of time, of budget, then everyone's modus operandi as their standard function is that they try to filter things out. So basically, when you're presenting ideas, You're up against the Krog brain. The Krog brain is trying to save resources. It's trying to save the high functioning brain capacity. And it does everything to filter your ideas out. So it's looking for an opportunity to ignore your ideas without consequence. It happens all the time, especially in today's attention economy, when every single direction people are getting these messages. People have very, very short attention spans. This is even more accentuated. So before getting into the details of that, do you have any comments on this?
Not really. I mean, you're covering it really well. This is something that we see every day. You know, the data scientists, you know, we're staying up here in that prefrontal, and we're always asking for stuff because generally speaking, data science, while it's very exciting, is a cost center. So, you know, the comment that I would add is this is highly applicable to us, even though we're not investment bankers pitching, you know, 9-digit, you know, construction projects or whatever, you know, Mr. Klaff was doing. I think the story in his book was like about a stadium or something, but that's not us. But you know, if you need an extra server, that is us, and it's the same exact scenario. So I think you're covering it great, and just want to remind everybody that this is relevant to us, even though we're not investment bank.
Absolutely. Even more so because the idea here is that if the message is not novel, it's not interesting, and it's not relevant, the brain will shut it down to save resources. And also, if it's confusing, complicated, or irrelevant, again, it will shut it down. And with data analytics, there are a lot of numbers involved, a lot of stats involved. So it gets confusing and alien very quickly. And it's actually hard to make some of those connections, or it actually takes an effort and a few layers of translation to make that message appeal to that more instinctual core part of the brain. So again, the whole question that the cog brain is asking all the time is, can I ignore this without consequence? Now, to overcome this barrier, there is this concept of hot cognition versus cold cognition. So hot cognition is basically messages that appeal to emotion, that appeal to instinct, that talk about relationships, and then cold cognition that has to do with facts, logical arguments, and numbers. Now, in order to bypass the defense and filtering mechanism of the Krog brain, the easiest way to do that is to focus on hot cognitive messaging. So with hot cognitive messaging, it's interesting then, and we're going to talk about the actual technique here, because there's a very specific technique that I recommend to use that works. Basically, what we talked about is just the context of it and the reason to apply the technique that's coming. But this hot cognitive, cold cognitive idea is the connective tissue there. So in general, leading with hot cognition makes sense to break down defenses and basically get the audience on your team. You're not going to get them on your team by confusing them, by getting them to tune out because what you're saying is boring. Again, numbers and stats are the easiest way to achieve this very, very quickly, but hot cognitive things. Now, if you want to change someone's mind, because whenever someone sits down who's worthy of pitching, quote unquote, well, that person will have a limited amount of time, limited amount of resources. If you want someone to make a decision in your favor, usually as they sit down and you ask them whether they want to do something, well, if they are not really bought in, if they are not sold on the idea, obviously they will not spare those scarce resources that they will have. So you want to change their minds. And to think about it this way, so if you want to change someone's mind, first you're going to make them kind of malleable and open to the idea. And hot cognition will achieve that. It kind of warms that person up. It will make them open for change. So through intrigue and excitement, they become open for change. But then cold cognition, so make no mistake, is not useless. So it's absolutely necessary. So that doesn't mean that your numbers and the stats, whatever you can back your arguments up with, is unnecessary. It's the contrary. But think about it this way. When you make someone open for change with hot cognition, then you will create trust and confidence and clarity on the next steps. So you kind of need to cool them down, you know? So if you actually want next steps and you want the follow-up, you need both. And I don't think this is something that we discussed actually in depth in our previous conversation, because I think maybe it was too much on the idea that, hey, you just need to create novelty and intrigue all the time. But this caveat is necessary here.
Yeah, I agree. And this is something that I coach a lot of people on when I help them make that transition from being kind of like a pure technician to more of a front facing presenter or even like a up and coming executive. This framework almost perfectly aligns with the framework that, a lot of sales and marketing also would exploit, which is you sort of decide emotionally and then you rationalize your way into a justification so that you can tell other people, right? And so this framework of using hot cognition, like get that emotional resonance, so they're like, basically get them to a yes in their heart, and then use that data science, use that analytics, use that data storytelling to kind of give them the rope or to solidify that with empiricism so that it looks like a rational, cold, calculated decision, even though there was something in that emotional appeal that actually got you there within the first minute or two of your pitch. And another thing I'd add, we're talking about emotions and hot cognition, but just to put some tangible labels on stuff, there's 3 emotions that are pretty easy to tap into, and you may feel yourself getting tapped into quite often. So that's fear, greed, and anger. Those are the 3 easiest emotions to tap into in a corporate setting. Marketing setting, you may also have experienced lust-based marketing, right? They have hot chicks or hot dudes trying to sell things like makes no sense, right? Like you'll have an 11 out of 10 model trying to sell you pens. I'm like, why is she selling pens? But those emotions in a corporate setting, fear of a loss, fear of missed opportunity, FOMO, scarcity, all that stuff we've talked about in different episodes, that's your hot cognition. That's fear. Oh, something bad is going to happen if I don't take action. I can no longer ignore this without consequence, right? That's the croc filter. Greed is sort of the opposite, which is, hey, let's get excited about something like, hey, if you do this, you can make more money, you get a bigger bonus. And then anger, which is a little bit harder to channel productively. But again, the news media loves to tap into anger with rage bait and outrage stuff. But if you get somebody angry, you can get them to take action. And then they might realize after, like, oh, why did I do that? But you can potentially tap into that, although it's very difficult in the corporate setting. So I would say fear and greed are probably your best friends, but that's what's activating the hot cognition. That's the, if you don't do this, something bad will happen, or you should do this because something good will happen. That's what we're talking about with hot cognition. And then, oh, by the way, in the appendix, I've got 37 slides that'll give you all of the empiricism you could ever possibly want to justify this to your boss and your boss's boss.
Absolutely. And actually with this, like the fear, greed, anger, it sounds, again, I think very Machiavellian, is that, oh, you're like pulling people's strings through these negative emotions. But okay, think about it this way. Like fear is nothing but a concern about some sort of potential pitfall. As you said, FOMO is natural, right? Absolutely. Right. Greed and anger. So greed is nothing but, in this context, is like appeal to desire, right? So people, even if it's not necessarily greed to the level of an absence of a virtue there, that's what the greed indicates, but it's just a desire. With anger, it's nothing but pain. Yeah. People have frustrations, they have pain that they experience on a day-to-day basis, and it might make them angry. They don't need to necessarily give into that anger, again, to the level of the absence of virtue, but appealing to those things, those are real for a person, right? So real every single moment.
Right.
Facts and numbers, they are removed, and that's the problem. So even with what you said, I think it's so important and it's worth reiterating. And I always say that every kind of pitch slash presentation slash story has 2 main parts. I mean, you can always slice things up in a million ways, but one way to look at it is that there's the why not part and there's the why part. The why not is in the beginning. Everyone is defensive because everyone has better things to do always, until you earn that place. So basically, in the beginning, the brain is constantly looking for a reason of why not to buy into this, why not prioritize this. And you can break that with hot cognition. So hot cognitive things will break them out of that mold. And then the why part, now this is when, as you said, they need to justify their decisions with logic and numbers. From their perspective, it will seem like that they are making decisions on a logical basis, but no human being ever made a decision purely on logical basis. Everyone did get an emotional buy-in first. Hot cognition, cold cognition, why part, and why not part and why part. So an easy way to actually use this in real life is this storytelling structure. So a compelling narrative that includes elements of tension, novelty, and intrigue will captivate the listener and make them more receptive to that message. And you can use this. So this is actually something that we talked about before, Dave. I think this is definitely something that we will also unpack in the synthesis. But it's a narrative structure where you begin with something where you just lay the landscape, you create context. That's usually way of the world, which is something that everyone knows about. The way of the world can be some big trend that everyone is familiar with, something that's happening in the company, something that you can share together. Again, this just kind of brings down defenses a little bit. Then you focus on the present. When you focus on the present, it's good to focus on pain. So it's good to focus on pain because that's what's on everyone's mind. And that's what they are most receptive to fixing, right? And again, this is also familiar. They are familiar with how they feel. All too familiar, right? So this is the present. Then you shift into the future. So the future is when you appeal to the desires. And this is also what introduces novelty. It is novel because it's something that people don't have. They desire what they don't have, right? So it kind of deals with that hard cognitive aspect of it. And then, and we haven't spoken about this before. So once you have the right context and you focused on the present, ideally with some pain that's being addressed here, and ideally painting a picture about a desirable outcome in the future, then you log down on the challenge. So the challenge is something that's in between, like stands in between the current state and the future state that's desired. And this brings this clear barrier to focus. And now you have a focal point and a direction to your story. So once you have that, you introduce an insight, which creates intrigue. So an insight can be something, again, that's something new, that's something that holds the promise of being able to move that current situation towards that future state. Then you get more specific by offering a method. So a method creates confidence. There is a way to actually overcome this. It's a series of steps. It's a special way of addressing that challenge. And then when you map that method onto the current situation, you have a solution, right? And that's where you actually get the buy-in. So if you want to offer the solution right away, people don't have the necessary context. They're not bought in emotionally. They don't see clearly what kind of barrier needs to be removed as well. And they just don't have confidence whether it will work or not. So they will be like many, many steps removed. So in order to get that buy-in, you build up that narrative. And once you have the buy-in, then with due diligence, you drive the next steps. Now, this is because there are so many narrative structures that you can use. This is the money shot because every single situation and every single presentation and every story worth telling can be fit into this. Because if you don't have a solution, if you don't have a method, if you don't have pain that you're addressing, if you don't have those things, don't tell the story. Like, find a better story to tell, right? And if you don't have an audience that would actually benefit from whatever you're offering, again, find another audience, find a different solution. So it's actually a great mechanism also to curate your stories and curate your solutions as well. So again, we talked about this before, but I don't know if we talked about it in this much depth. What do you think about this narrative structure to kind of target that problem that we outlined with the brain structure and the brain's filtering mechanism, and to really fit into this hot cognitive, cold cognitive mode?
I think this structure works, and I look back and I think about times when I was able to pitch ideas pre-Klaff, this project with you. I think I might have naturally had like the broad strokes of this, but as you're talking and you have the framework encapsulated in front of us, I've got to pitch a model in 2 weeks, and I'm thinking through like, okay, like this is my weakness. So my biggest weakness is plotting. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm pretty good at, I've got great openers, I've got great rapport building, but when it comes to, I might have the slide deck open, I'm just like, man, what's the right order? So here's like a good framework that I can try this for the order. So I'm playing through my head. Okay, what am I going to use for way of the world? Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Pain and familiarity. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? I'm pitching a pricing model. Right. So it's things like, okay, like we want to grow our total earnings. We want to achieve better margin, all this other stuff. All of these things kind of fit in. And then, what's the challenge? Well, inexperienced salespeople don't know how to negotiate. Okay, what's the solution or what's the insight? Well, if you do it, if you use the model, you can get an extra 10%. Or what's the solution? The model will say when to push, when to lean back. Next steps. Okay, let's get this into a pilot or something. So I'm planning through this, and and I think about the prospecting tool that I made a couple of years ago, right? What's the landscape? There's 2 million businesses. We don't know who any of them are. We don't know who their brokers are. We don't know where their employees live. We don't know how it sits with our network. The pain, you're waiting for them to send you an RFP instead of you being able to go get them. Okay, here's the future. You're on the offensive. You get to go attack. Challenge, you don't know what to ask for. Solution, I've got the thing that can help you find your wish list or your target list. Solution, come to the app. Next steps, let's roll it out. Let's get everybody on there and let's track adoption. So it's this framework. I'm struggle to think of anything I've ever created in my data science career that doesn't fit this beautifully. And I wish I had this framework earlier, because it would have saved me a ton of time and effort trying to figure out the right order for the Lego pieces. Mm-hmm. So as a practitioner, this is bang on, dude. I think everybody needs this.
No, that's amazing. I'm very happy. An interesting fact that this actual structure is not in the book. It's not available anywhere. So I kind of put that together based on other stuff that for example, he recommends a strong method, right? The strong method is a little bit more complicated. It's very much designed for a venture capitalist pitch to get investment. Mm-hmm. Also, there are different approaches that he talks about here and there, which kind of map onto this structure, but maybe with some missing pieces. So this is a culmination of those. And specifically, I chose this because I think that for a data analytics leadership role in a big company, I think this is just the one that people will actually end up using with a super high hit rate. And
yes,
as you said, this is exactly what I think will happen, is that there's no presentation, there's no offer that you wouldn't be able to either reorganize alongside these narrative blocks or enrich. So actually what we will do is, especially the synthesis part, we will create a template and a series of questions that you can apply to any kind of solution, right? What kind of questions do I need to be able to answer before I even start building a deck? And once I'm building it, what comes after what? Because what this does is that if you just offer the solution to begin with, which makes sense to you, it makes perfect sense to you, but there are all these unspoken objections that the audience will pose, either articulated out loud or either just in and of themselves say that that's great, we're going to take a look at that later, right? We're going to get back to you. In order to avoid that, you can just use this and it will solve all these problems that we laid out on the neuroeconomics level, which again, those are issues that everyone kind of feels, but no one sees it. It's an invisible wall. And this is the way to bash through that invisible wall. And this is typically the thing, by the way, that if you do it enough times, it will become second nature. It will become muscle memory. So whenever you present an idea, it will automatically present it in that way. Okay, so this is the neuroeconomics part. By the way, this was by far the longest piece, because I do see this as the central concept. And then let's say frame control. So the frame control piece, he does bring this. So frames, we're not going to go into detail about what frames are, because probably we could spend a whole podcast episode just trying to really grapple with what frames are. But look at them as instruments and mental structures that you use always to package social relations, information, value, and meaning. Okay, so it's the frame of reference to which you look at the world. So whenever you look at something, your brain already assigns certain meanings to it, certain consequences to it, your personal experiences, your qualification, your skill level, everything plays a role in how you see anything coming in from the external world. So Klaff uses these frame concepts as if two people interact, their frames of reference clash together, right? So everything that they bring into the situation, in order to get to the same level and get on the same page, one of those frames will need to overcome the other. So he very much looks at this in a in a dominance context. So, and this is why the reason for this is because in his world, like pitching investors and getting these like high stakes 15-minute presentations in where you really need to win the deal. In that world, in finance, this is very pronounced. Now, I don't think that this is as relevant in data analytics in a business setting to that extent. But the main tool here, or the main reason why you want to use this tool, is that fostering collaboration in an enterprise requires understanding and managing the frame dynamics. So frame control is crucial in business communication because winning frame control leads to acceptance and collaboration. So look at it that way. Again, even if you don't fully understand, you're still confused about what frames are and all that, how the dominance works, look at it this way. So imagine that you have the right story. Now you have the right story. We just talked about how to structure the right story so that the brain's filtering mechanism doesn't throw it back in your face. That's great, but still you can have the right story, but you can still get sidetracked. So you can start telling your story, but people will put you off course in all kinds of ways. Even if they just are not listening to you, they're tuning you out, or they are throwing questions that kind of are not constructive, not collaborative. Usually it indicates that you lack frame control. So frame control, think about it this way. If the story itself sets the right direction of where we're going, so from A to B, and what we need to go through in order to get to our destination, that's the direction, then the frame control drives things forward. So make sure that you're not getting sidetracked, you're not getting stopped. So you don't need to master frames to the level of being able to pitch for $1 million investment at Wall Street, right? But in order to keep your message on point, you need to always be sure that you're taking the initiative, that you're the one asking questions, that you're always outlining next steps, and make sure that the lack of direction and the lack of that kind of structure does not sabotage collaboration. So frame control in this setting, it's about asserting a collaborative frame. So collaboration is not the same as brainstorming necessarily. It is about actually working together towards a solution. And that requires you driving that interaction. So by holding that frame, that's what it means. So, and you can always check whether you're holding the frame or not. Are you the one asking the questions? Are you the one taking initiatives? Are you the one who's outlining the next steps? Or are you on someone else's agenda? And when you have the right story, and I think this is actually something that is a pitfall for data analytics leaders, because you can still have that idea that my numbers will do the job for me. You do need to make sure that that assertion of where we're going is in your hands, right? So what do you think about this, Dave? Looking at the frame control in that way as a mechanism to keep your story on track on a social dynamics level.
Yeah, I think for while the story and the croc brain and the cognition and the neuroeconomics, I think is highly applicable to our profession. I think this one is where you can fast forward through it. And the reason why I would say that is, yes, we do aspire to get to that collaborative frame, but so often we are stapled to the subordinate frame, right? And you think about, different scenarios that you might have in this data storyteller executive, right? You're a cost center. You might be working with a P&L leader. You might be working with a revenue center. Hell, you might just be a director. I know a lot of your clients and a lot of people that would tune into this are probably at the director level, trying to affect change with a VP or an SVP. Like, it's very difficult to pull them into your frame because they can, the last time we spoke, you used the cop, the police officer example, where they have the invincible frame. In a corporate setting, because of the budgetary control, because of the positional authority, because so many different reasons. And then that's not even thinking about whether they're politically wired too. I mean, I've had situations where you might have somebody, you checkmated in so many ways, but they're politically, advantaged, and you're still going to be subordinated to them, right? So this is where, focusing on collaboration, yes, and trying to ask questions and trying to use different social tactics to try to at least preserve. Maybe you can keep a corner, like if we're going to use the frame as a metaphor, right? So you have like a big square, and you can just maintain maybe like a little tiny square in the corner where you have a toehold into the frame. Maybe this is where I find like Voss is a hell of a lot more applicable, because Voss tries to bypass frame with a lot of his tactics. Like, the way that he uses calibrated questions, the way that he uses mirror neurons and mirroring, in my opinion, that sets you up to sort of operate even without having to achieve frame control. But with Klaff, and it's like, let's bang the frames together, and here's a couple of tricks to help you get your frame to win. I don't ever have the ability to just like walk away. Right? Even with Voss, and Voss is like, remember, you can walk away. I mean, if I walk away from my CEO, like that literally means I left the company. Like I can't just be like, okay, fine, I'm going to CEO number 2. So this content is interesting. I think there's probably tips to glean from it, but this is where, like, if you're that data storyteller, you have to filter all of that through your own frame, which is you're going to be banging against a lot of intractable frames. It's just the nature of being in corporate in that sort of enabler / subordinate role. So take the social tactics out so that you can maintain interest during the conversation, because you don't want to get tuned out. But I think anyone who aspires for frame dominance is just asking for trouble. Even like the CADO is probably going to relinquish frame control to the chief whatever officer who's running the P&L, because at the end of the day, the CADO is funded by the whatever CSO, CMO, whatever. And
so with this, actually, I think you kind of nailed down like what is the takeaway here, because there is a reality of frames working, and you're not gonna like over dominate the CEO. I think nor should you, right? So it's not something that you can do, or should you? Now, at the same time, and I think this is actually why I think Klaff does not really diverge from Klaff, or Klaff from Voss. What I wanted to say is because Voss does hold the frame. And how does he hold the frame? Well, he asks questions, asks good questions. So that means that he is in control of the interaction, right? He is in control, not necessarily by like setting exactly where we want to go, but he's the one kind of driving things forward. So it's a very tactical thing. So I would say that the takeaway here is that, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, because one of the tactics also at the very end, or like techniques, is about asking the right questions. Is ask yourself the question always at who's asking the questions here. So if, let's say, the CEO asks you a question, look for an opportunity to ask a question back, right? Answer, of course. So don't answer a question with a question, but always look for, how can I drive this? How can I get them to engage with me? So it's less about like organizing your status in a way. It's more about, I think, on a tactical level. Now, the next thing here is also very much connected to that. Again, status, I only spent like 2 bullet points on this. So you can have the right story, you can drive the interaction, but you can still be ignored or dismissed. And again, this is a very tactical thing. So because of that position that you just mentioned, that you're always a service function, which is great. I mean, that's who you guys are. And there's the business who you're serving. But still, the status issue will sabotage your projects. It will make you hit resistance. And by, on a tactical level, driving the conversation, and also in general, maybe on a more strategic level, trying to organize yourselves as a team and the solutions that you're building so that you have what we call local star power and the price frame, I think that is the most applicable thing here. So the local star power comes from actually being in a room where you're presenting and you hold that frame. A lot of times, again, by just asking good questions, people will look to you to actually drive that thing forward, which means that you will have the framing. It doesn't matter that they are the CEO. In fact, it doesn't even matter if there's like another status distribution with the COP frame, right? You can have that little bit of local star power there on a very tactical level. And in general, look to create context where what you're offering is rare, it's unique, it's high value, and there's high demand against low supply. I'm not saying it's easy to create that, but that's definitely where you should pivot on a strategic level when you're deciding what kind of solutions you're building, what kind of stakeholders you're looking to serve. That's the dynamic that you're aiming at. Will it be always perfect? Will it always be that the business is lining up because you just can't serve everyone? Not necessarily, but you can definitely pivot in that direction. And that's actually all that I would say about status. But what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, this one I think is where Klaff comes back around, and in my opinion, as someone who read it, this is where data science kind of gets a little bit of a tailwind, because at least for the foreseeable future, we'll see what AI does to everything, but we have that perception, that's the the 160 IQ person, that's the you do things that I could never do, right? You can kind of have that bit of panache, and you want to share status where appropriate to kind of bring them along, right? You don't want to build a wall around your ivory tower. You want to say, no, you're just as smart as I am, differently smart, or things like that, right? And the prize is, you have the only path to get this data science widget is through us, right? So you have that kind of artificial scarcity because you do have kind of a monopoly on the coolest stuff, right? Not to, I hate disparaging, but just to hold up a contrast point, right? People aren't oh my God, you perfectly balance the credits and debits. It's an important function. Accounting is an important function, but when we're I built an app that does all this stuff to help you find prospects, they're that's amazing. If you're we improved our Excel capabilities, so now we perfectly balance credits and debits or something in more of an accounting discipline, people are great, as long as we don't get audited, right? So it's there's that sort of panache that the data science still has, right? Or because we're building really cool stuff. Generally speaking, we build cool stuff. That's your local star power. So that's currency that you can use in these interactions in order to sort of become that local star, to almost become the keeper of the prize or the builder of the prize. Come through me. I have the prizes over here. My prizes are better prospecting, more sales, more fills, whatever. And so that's very relevant. So it's almost like the bookends of Klaff are super relevant to the data storyteller, because while we can't conquer a frame from a positional power, we can make people want to work with us because we've got cool stuff up our sleeves. And I think that's something that a lot of the people that would tune into this should remind themselves. Yeah, we're a service center, but we're the service center that builds the cool stuff.
Absolutely. And I think 100%. So the whole neuroeconomics thing, highly applicable, the golden structure and all that with the frame and the status, highly interconnected. I think definitely being aware of that these are realities that are happening, and then focusing on the 80-20 of what you can do to kind of tip the scale in your favor is exactly what you said. So that's why I wanted to focus on very specific things that you can do on a tactical and on a strategic level. Okay, so that's Pitch Anything. He wrote another book called Flip the Script. This is a follow-up. So Pitch Anything was a huge success. I think mainly because it just spoke to realities that everyone lives through every single day, and it really illuminated those invisible walls and offered solutions, especially in a profession when you need to pitch ideas that would very effectively overcome those barriers. Now, Flip the Script is a continuation of that. It wasn't as popular as his first book, but it offered a few nice additions to this. So we're going to run through that. There are three key ideas. One is Inception, the other is status alignment, and the third is the big idea. So let's look at it one by one. This is the only slide, by the way, that I have for it. So basically the Inception. So actually the book came out around the time of Christopher Nolan's Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio. Have you seen that movie, Dave? No. Okay.
I love that movie. That's a great movie. That's an absolutely wonderful movie.
Oh, it is. It is. It's truly a classic. And we actually talked about this with Roberto Maranca on a previous podcast of the applicability of that movie. So what Klaff offers is, it sounds a little wacky of, instead of actually getting someone to buy into your idea, get them to think that the idea is theirs, which again is kind of a sensational offer. And that's what he's actually saying here. That's very applicable, is that if you can, instead of you telling the story, work with your stakeholder so that they tell the story. And so what does that mean? What does it even mean? So, of course, there are situations when you're just presenting and pitching, but with questions, you can get people involved. And if you look at that narrative structure that we talked about, the way of the world and the present and the future and the challenge and the barrier, you can basically reverse engineer the questions from the story that's told. So you see the story, you see the vision, they don't. And by asking the right questions and getting them to articulate these ideas, and by the way, when you're asking questions, it's not like you will know the answers. So there's a genuine curiosity, but you're kind of driving towards a conclusion. So by really planning out your questions in a way that will drive your narrative forward, you can put the audience in the center of the story in a very real way, because they will tell the story themselves for you. So I think how a class presents it, again, it sounds a little bit like Machiavellian, but it's just basically good consulting, like applying a good consultative frame on telling a story. So it's really the art of asking the right questions the right way. So even, again, if we go back to the narrative structure, way of the world, of course, you can set the scene, but then in a conversational setting, ask questions about the present and the pain first. Then ask about what is that goal and that future state of success that they want to attain. Ask what they see is between them right now and that compelling future vision. What do they see as a challenge? What do they see as the barrier? Of course, you will offer your insight, but again, as many times asking a question so that they feel involved, and not just feel involved, but they are involved, right? So that also kind of lowers the self-centeredness. And often, when you're building something that you're passionate about, you can kind of get swept up in it. And it's not only something that's, not as effective from a persuasion perspective. Really, actually, when you think about how can I co-create with my stakeholders, how can I get them involved, it is through that. Think about the right story, and then think about what kind of questions you can ask them to bring that story to life. So that's like one of the ideas there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? So first, you've used Machiavellian twice in the last hour as a bit of a pejorative, and I would just strongly urge people to not think of it that way. So I know the way that it's commonly used, but he was a political player. He was acutely aware of politics and interpersonal dynamics in, was it like feudal Italy or something? I forgot exactly what the right way to refer to that era was, that was right? The Medici family and stuff. But, if you've read his book, or his books, actually, the collected works of Machiavelli translated by Constantine, there's nothing nefarious about it at all. He's like, hey, people don't like it when you are mean to them. People would much prefer that you were nice to them. If you're going to do something mean, you have to go all the way so that there's no chance for recourse. I mean, that's not evil. That's not nefarious. That's just very frank, right? So it's like, I know that this is way off topic, but people say, "Oh, Machiavellian, manipulative." It's like none of this is manipulative. It's kind of an acceptance and a frank and a pragmatic understanding of human nature. Like, you're not going to listen to me unless I can resonate with you emotionally. Is that nefarious? No, that's just not being stupid and trying to walk it through a brick wall, wondering why it doesn't open like a door. So anyway, that's like a side note, but I hear that all the time, and it's just I always have to be guys, have you read his books? He's not that bad. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I know this is Klaff twice, but in Voss calibrated questions, Klaff trying to jockey for frame or even just to maintain engagement, and now we're in flip the script, which is where you're trying to use an Inception technique to bring someone along. It's all about asking questions, which I think is ironic because as the data science professionals, we're supposed to have all the answers, but really it's about bringing the right questions. And I don't know if that's like a humility thing. I don't know if that's like a share the status type of thing. I'm not sure exactly why this is so powerful, especially when we do it, but absolutely right. Like, I love to ask the question. This gets to that future painting thing. Hey, what's going to be different when you have this? What are you going to do with it if you had it? If I could just go back into my office and come out with the thing, what would you do with it? What would be different for you? And, you get them, it helps get them excited, but also if they don't have a good answer, it also helps you filter out what you shouldn't be working on. Right? You're like, what would you do differently if you had the thing? Nothing at all. Oh, well, then why are we doing it? Oh, good point. Right? So it's like, that's a bit of a caricature, but that is a very possible thing that could happen. And so the importance of questions, like, it keeps coming up, and I think it's gonna come up when we do McCraney. It's going to come up when we do the synthesis. So just calling that out, like that the power of good questions. It's we're seeing it all over the place, and I think that's the best I could do from an observation point of view. So one is like, let's not drag Mr. Machiavelli through the mud, and two, like, the power of questions. It's so important.
Absolutely. And also in the intro episode, we actually went in depth into that, the whole idea of, demystifying this whole persuasion thing. And actually, you're right. So when I use Machiavellian, actually what I'm saying is manipulative, it just became kind of like a synonym in the culture. So you're 100% right. And with regards to the questions, and I know that we have 5 minutes left, but we can actually land the plane on time. You'll see is that with the questions in the synthesis, we'll actually come up with a series of playbooks for certain scenarios, for certain outcomes in terms of questions. So we're almost like pitching the idea of questions are the answer to use like an interesting phrase. So
the answer is the question. I like that. Let's get a t-shirt. That's our t-shirt right there.
Yeah, exactly. However you want to play it. Yeah. That's the Inception idea. Status alignment. So that's actually very simple. So again, everyone kind of knows it, but the status alignment, how he looks at it, is that being on the same level as your audience, not from a power or dominance perspective, but being on their level, is using their language. So getting that language market fit, which is actually like a market phrase, nailed down is crucial. And for you to nail down that language market fit, again, you need to understand what these people talk about, how they talk about it. And when you talk to that audience, the more you can flex that in an authentic way, the more that they will be receptive to your ideas. Very, very important. Everyone talks about it. And there's actually a way of being able to execute, again, through questioning, which we won't have time to unpack here. But that's like one thing. If you want to achieve status alignment, you need to nail down the language market fit and to use their language. And the other, which is kind of connected to that.
100%, dude. 100%.
Yeah. And then the flip side of that is usually you don't use highly technical language. You avoid actually using data analytics phrases that the audience is not familiar with. And that's true outside of what we call the flash roll. So once you've engaged your audience with the right hot cognitive approach, once you actually apply the right language, getting to their level and being in the same conversation, when you achieve that alignment and that match at the right moment, when your goal is to create confidence, especially when you're offering the method, you can and absolutely should spend that 17-minute espresso shot of highly technical language that is designed specifically to flex your analytics muscles, to show your expertise and make the audience think that, whoa, I'm in the hands of a professional. If you do this at the wrong time, in the wrong way, they will just think that you're out of touch. But if you do it at the right time and the right way, you will achieve higher confidence and trust in your abilities. So what do you think about this status alignment, both at the language market fit and the flash roll?
So language market fit it resonates with me so much, because if I think back to almost every disconnect, frustration, revision, go back and do the deck all over again type of scenario, it's because of language market fit. And I think this is where, the devil's in the details, so to speak. Not exactly the right colloquialism, but here's where I'm going with this, right? There's a lot of synonyms, especially in business, because business is not that difficult. Like, you can have very, very complicated intellectual property like the iPhone or a particular sales algorithm or software. That's just very technical. But at the end of the day, you're trying to complete transactions, find customers, right? All these different things. And every company is going to use slightly different language to describe something, right? Like, we have, this just happened, right? We're doing a consulting project and we were getting into like nuance on what certain words meant. And, we talk about the levers of our business. And so, we might say something like fill rate. How many open jobs can we fill? Okay. I'm coming from sales. In insurance, I'm thinking win rate. Now, at the end of the day, it's the same thing. When you win the opening or you fill the opening, it's the exact same thing. You put a provider on site, you make money. But if I'm running around talking about win rate, they're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Go back. I don't understand. You mean fill? Fill. Say fill. Such a simple little like sleight of hand. At the end of the day, we're both talking about a successful transaction. But if you don't have the words lined up, then that's where you're going to get snared. And you want to turn on the cold cognition, or if you want to get the croc brain kind of, ornery, because it's got all those teeth but no toothbrush, right? The water boy joke, right? Don't use the right terminology for something. That's like the easiest way to like tank a meeting. It's the easiest way to piss off a client. It's the easiest way to look like you're out of touch as a data scientist, because you're coming out of the ivory tower. You're like, I've completed the analysis and I'm going to use the wrong words, and you're going to think I don't understand the business. It's a credibility killer too, right? So that right there, if you take nothing, like the flash roll is a little bit more of like a black belt technique. Like, okay, now I'm going to, wow you with my technical background. But it's like, if you walked into the room, they probably know who you are. They know you've got multiple degrees. They know you've got a doctorate. They know you've been doing this for 20 years. They know that you could potentially program with your eyes closed. Like they kind of know that. So the flash roll in a corporate setting, when you're already all work for the same company, helpful, but nowhere near as helpful as language market fit. Language market fit, probably the single most important alignment thing you can do to avoid those like just stupid time suck pitfalls. Like, what do you mean by win? What do you mean by fill? Just that's so important. And like as soon as you pointed that out on the slide, I was like, yeah, that's the one right there. Make sure you magnify that one, because man, that's important.
And actually, and I know that you need to go, but often when people say that, there's a lack of data literacy in the business, a lot of times what they mean is that I'm not using the right language market fit. Let's say that one more time. One more time for the audience. Say that one more time for the audience. That's such a great point, dude. Go ahead. Say it again. So often when people say that, the business does not have the right level of data literacy, what they mean is that I'm not applying the right level of language market fit. The misalignment is very real, but in its nature is different than what you assume, the direction of it, right? With language market fit, again, we'll talk about that and techniques of actually how to like log down into that, and we'll look at examples in the synthesis. Final big idea, which we're not going to spend time on because actually it's not that big of an idea, but it's actually about when you're selling the future and that future state, think about it intentionally over time to action. And this is more like a branding entrepreneurial effort when you're leading an analytics function, is what is that big idea that you're selling to the business, and kind of package all those desires and all those hard cognitive levers that appeal to people's desires and frustrations and all that into that big idea that effectively encapsulates all of that, and use that big idea as a vehicle for your stories. So that's the big idea. That's more like a strategic initiative that you do over time to engineer and construct that, what we call often is a data story engine. So that's the flip the script final technique. Again, we can probably talk about that a little bit in the synthesis. But Dave, appreciate time, sir. I think this conversation was almost sabotaged by the internet, but we made it through. And I think there were some big ideas and some applicable techniques that we managed to shine a light on.
Yeah, I'm going to shine a line one more time, because if I say it has to be said, it can't be said enough. When people complain about lack of data acumen, innumeracy, lack of understanding, It's a market language fit. And it's not their job to understand data science. It's our job to make the data science understandable to the business. Right. Now that doesn't fit on a t-shirt like questions are the answer, but we'll figure maybe there's a way to shorthand it so that it fits.
It goes on the back.
So yeah, man. Yeah. I think like you I don't know if that was planned or if we sort of surfaced it by mistake, but like holy crap, man, that's such a powerful insight. We got to make sure that we don't lose that one as we
No, absolutely. No, it just emerged organically. It wasn't even on the slide, but it was the inevitable conclusion. So appreciate time as always, and I'm really excited about next week's episode as well.
Yes, we're gonna keep the Fibonacci sequence going.
Always. All right. Take care. Have a good one.
Bye bye.